Authorization for the Federal Aviation Administration set to expire at midnight tomorrow. Senators now racing against the clock to pass a week-long extension. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
Senators considered the FAA Reauthorization bill on Thursday. It aims to bolster consumer protection and air traffic safety standards. The $105 billion bill funds the Federal Aviation Administration and sets its guidelines for the next 5 years. Funding for the FAA is set to expire tomorrow night. If it expires, this won't shut down air traffic, but there will be no policy direction in the aviation industry. A series of disputes on what would be in the bill has delayed its progress in the Senate.
Mostly people are for reauthorization. They just want to put something on top of it to get something out of it.
Well, you know, we all saw what happened during the pandemic when that industry was almost in collapse. We had to lean in and protect that, and it's another situation. So, but it's going to be a compromise, I suspect, and that's what only happens around here, is probably as it should.
Among many provisions, the bill includes funding to hire more air traffic controllers. It would also ensure automatic cash refunds to airline passengers whose flights are canceled and not rebooked. The bill would also prohibit airlines from charging fees for families to sit together and require airlines to accept vouchers and credits for at least 5 years. On Wednesday, the House passed a week-long extension to approve the bill. It's unclear whether the Senate will meet its deadline to pass the same extension by tomorrow night. Now, all of this comes after the FAA has experienced multiple near-miss collisions where there were miscommunications between air traffic control. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
And 7.2 million illegal aliens have now entered the United States over the past 3.5 years. A new documentary is now exposing how the federal government could be facilitating this massive influx of foreign nationals. Joining me now to talk about the film, Weapons of Mass Migration, is Joshua Phillip, senior investigative reporter and host of Epoch TV's Crossroads. Joshua Phillip, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, real pleasure, Steve. Anytime.
It's great to have you, Joshua. You have this new documentary. It's called Weapons of Mass Migration. It premieres tonight on Epoch TV. I want to show a clip of a preview of it and get your comment on the other side.
They have United Nations facilities here, and the people pushing this are leading people to their deaths.
To what extent is the United Nations facilitating the border crisis?
They're throwing rocks!
They're being overridden by international powers.
Joshua, very powerful stuff. How do intergovernment organizations like the United Nations and world governments factor into this border crisis?
I toured along most of the border in Texas. I went into Mexico. And what I found very quickly is that actually the cartels run certain checkpoints. The cartels run certain points of access to the United States, but actually they're not even active in some of the areas where you do have illegal mass migration. And what I was told across the board was that actually there were government programs facilitating it. For example, I was in Kinney County in Texas, of course, one of the border counties in Texas, and I spoke with the sheriff there, and the sheriff told me, you know, that he's having high-speed chases multiple times a day. His entire department is just dedicated basically to dealing with the migrant crisis. And I was like, well, what happens when you arrest the people? He goes, oh, we have to hand them over to these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and the NGOs, they bust them. And I'm like, well, what are the NGOs? And he goes, I don't know. He doesn't know. I say, well, where do they bust them to? He goes, I don't know. It could be anywhere. I say, well, who is telling you to do this? You know, he's like, well, it's the government orders. It's how the system is run. I'm like, well, what's the system? And he's like, I don't know. Even the sheriff who is forced to be part of this doesn't know. In the recent documentary I did, I went to El Cajon in Southern California, San Diego, actually close to where I grew up, in fact. And I interviewed the mayor of El Cajon. And they have these buses, these white buses from Customs Border Protection, coming in and dropping off groups of these migrants or illegal immigrants, whatever you want to call them, multiple times a day, just busloads of them into this, you know, small town in Southern California. And I asked the mayor, what's the system for this? Are they telling you what's behind it, what the agreements are? And he's like, no, they don't tell me. Yeah, he tells me that after the Customs Border Protection buses come and drop people off, there are these NGO buses that sometimes pick them up as well. And these people have airplane tickets, they have papers from Department of Homeland Security, and even the mayor of this town dealing with all of this is not being told what's going on. And this is where it gets shocking. And so, my work on this was I want to find out what the heck is going on. And frankly, I think the American people have a right to know. So what I did find is our government has signed on with an agreement with the United Nations called the Global Compact for Migration that has, in fact, established a process of coordination and cooperation with the UN, with more than 200, close to 270 non-governmental organizations. And this is a facilitated operation going into the United States, all through Latin America, even into different countries, into Western Europe and so on. And for some reason, we're not being told about it.
Really looking forward to watching Weapons of Mass Migration airing tonight on Epoch TV. Joshua Phillip, thank you so much.
Hey, pleasure, Steve. Thank you.
And the Chinese Communist regime's climate envoy is in Washington, D.C. This comes after the two countries signed the Sunnylands Statement, agreeing to cooperate on climate objectives, such as transitioning away from fossil fuels. Steve Malloy, founder of JunkScience.com, tells the Epoch Times the CCP is exploiting the climate agenda to subvert America.
China is using climate to subvert the United States. China has gotten the United States and Western Europe and really all the developed countries hooked on green technology, to a great extent. Solar panels, wind turbines, electric vehicles all depend on China.
John Podesta, special presidential envoy for climate, is meeting with his Chinese counterpart in person for the first time. The State Department saying the meeting will focus on energy transition, greenhouse gases, along with more. Despite being the world's largest polluter and lacking in environmental regulation, China is not held in the Paris Agreement to the same climate goals as developed nations such as the United States. Critics say the Chinese regime is using the climate discussion to couple itself with the United States and its economy at a time when the U.S. is reevaluating its relations with China. And the Heritage Foundation is launching a new project studying just how the U.S. is losing its energy security because of the CCP. Joining me now in studio is Matthew Tragesser from the Heritage Foundation. Matthew Tragesser, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Of course, Matthew. Heritage launching this new four-part project. It's called Chinese Handcuffs, China's Immobilizing Trap on U.S. Energy Security and Prosperity. If you could, talk to us about the CCP's strategy and how they use U.S. energy sources to control its environmental agenda.
So China is undermining our energy security, as you mentioned there. What they're doing is they're investing heavily in their renewable energy sector. And so, believe it or not, they actually control 80% of solar panels, 80% of lithium batteries, which are used for electric vehicles here in the United States. And so what they're doing is basically handcuffing the United States to them, and which is why this project is called Chinese Handcuffs, because the further that the Biden administration pushes this radical climate agenda, the more trapped we are with China, because they are the, basically controlling a monopoly of these inputs going into these renewable technologies. And so this is a comprehensive project. It'll be released throughout the year. Pillar 1 was released this week, and we'll have 3 more coming out shortly.
It does seem rather concerning that there could be political forces within the United States that are collaborating with the CCP, wittingly or not, in this agenda.
And that's right. And it's, these climate alarmists, it's the Biden administration. I mean, we should be unleashing American energy. We have an abundance of it at home: coal, natural gas, oil. We have public land that can be used and explored and extracted for fossil fuels. And the Biden administration has basically looked the other way and said, hey, let's rely on China more. Let's rely on these renewable energies, and it's really putting America last.
Talk to us about the sort of, I guess, hypocrisy of China profiting off of the U.S. climate agenda with owning the market, China owning the market on components for EVs, all the while being the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide.
Right. It's a really strange relationship if you think about it. But not only are they investing in the renewable energies, which has really seen a surge in the last decade or so, but they're still very heavily invested in their fossil fuel industry. They're producing 2 coal plants, Steve, a week. We're shutting down coal plants here in the United States. So clearly they're getting an advantage over us with their energy security. And I just don't see why would we be collaborating with our top adversary for renewable energies and just our energy in general.
So what are some of the steps the United States needs to take in order to combat China's long-term plan of global dominance through controlling energy?
Sure. Well, as I just mentioned, it's unleashing American energy here at home. That's reducing bureaucratic red tape. It's investing more in the extraction and exploration processes on public lands. By the Grand Canyon in Arizona, where I worked for Congressman Biggs for 2 years previously, there's uranium, rich amounts of uranium near the Grand Canyon. In the Biden administration, through an executive order, they stopped all extraction, exploration of this critical mineral there. So that means we're more reliant on China. There's other critical minerals we're completely reliant on China for, lithium for these EV batteries, cobalt, graphite, and these are all part of these renewable energies, whether it's used for wind turbines, solar panels, you name it. And it just makes no sense. We have an abundance here at home, and we shouldn't be relying on our top adversary.
Matthew Traeger, sir, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.